Now, sitting to my left is retired Major Edward Thomas. I've known Ed Thomas here for quite a while. I'm an antique buff. And one time I went to Belton and I saw a store, Major Dad's. You may have known who that is. That's Major Dad. Sir, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
And I just went to his shop one time and fell in love. The way he had it set up is kind of like what I did in my shop, just not as nice. Okay, he had a great time, so we had a great conversation, clicked really well, and through the years, and we contacted again each other just recently, and we got him on the show. And so I don't know where I'm going to start or how I'm going to do this, but sir, we got about 15 minutes, and I just wanted to get you on and let people know there's just real people out there doing what they got to do. There's no heroes. Everybody's a hero. The whole works. You just do what you got to do, and we wear the uniform. We serve our country. The whole works, and I want to hear your story.
Well, good morning. Thank you. I guess the best way to start this, and this just right off the cuff, I'm here in Texas and have been since 1975, semi-permanently, because I married a Texan after going through military flight school at Fort Walters, Texas. And you marry a Texan, you might as well reside.
That's right.
The fact that you're going to be a Texan. But at any rate, I'll back up from there and say a little bit about my background, what led me into Army aviation. And Army aviation, my wife doesn't like to hear it, but it's almost my first love. But she's kind of taken place over that.
Okay.
But at any rate, I always had a desire to fly since I was a kid, and never actually flew till I went on my first ride in a military helicopter. I went from high school to flight school. The Vietnam War was going on, just really getting started in 1963 when I was looking at going to flight school and trying to graduate from high school. In fact, I turned down a track scholarship to Clemson to go to Army flight school from high school. I went in as a warrant officer. Actually, I went in as a warrant officer candidate. I spent a year in flight school training to do what I knew I was eventually going to have to do, and that's go fight the war in Vietnam, because even my friends were saying, aren't you a little bit afraid to go? The war's going on and you're liable to go to Vietnam. Well, if you knew anything about flight school and the training at that time, and what 99% of the new pilots' orders was to Vietnam. So I knew that that's where I'd be going, or relatively confident that's where I'd be going. And in fact, 1 year from going on active duty in the military, because I had already been in the National Guard for a year and a half. So in January of 1963, I went to, 1964, I went to flight school. 1 year later, after graduating from flight school, I stepped out on the tarmac at Tan Son Nhut Airfield in South Vietnam. 1 year from the time I joined the military, went through flight training, and now I was there. So, it's a very tedious program being a warrant officer cadet. You spend half a day flying, a half a day in academics, and lots of check rides. In my case, I don't consider myself a genius, so I had to study hard, I had to work hard at it. And like I said, the first time I ever actually flew was my first flight in flight school. And up to that point, I'm thinking, can I handle this air work? Am I going to get air sick, or what the deal is? But it all went well. I did graduate as a warrant officer W1. And to kind of jump ahead just slightly, I spent my first tour in Vietnam as a warrant officer W1, came back and ended up being promoted to chief warrant officer, and then got a direct commission as second lieutenant. So now I'll jump back to the beginning of my time in Vietnam in 1965.
Don't let me stop it. When Matt shuts up, he's like, wow. I would just keep going, man.
I just talk about my first tour in Vietnam, because in fact I served two tours in Vietnam. One in 1965, from January 3rd of 65 to the 31st of December 1965. So on New Year's Eve, I'm heading home on a plane back to the United States. But stepping off the tarmac opened up a whole new world to me. I had spent my leave from flight school on my way to Vietnam at home watching the Vietnam War on television. This was what everybody referred to at that time, the first television war.
Right.
The general public watch actual battles going on. Well, I watched the Battle of Bengia being fought. The unit that I was headed to was in fact leading that battle, the 145th Aviation Battalion, and specifically the 120th Aviation Company, which I was assigned to. So I'm watching them go into the Bengia Valley, napalm bombs being dropped on the periphery by the F-100 fighters that were flying then, our aircraft going in and taking fire, and you're hearing radio calls taking fire, going in. You see cameras showing the burning aircraft in the landing zones, and it was everything battle really is. And it's not glorious, it's not glamorous, it's pretty scary. So I ended up getting in Vietnam while that battle is still going on. I got my orientation flight, then assigned an aircraft as a co-pilot. And my first mission, which I call my baptism of fire, was going into that same valley with the same scenario going on. Napalm being dropped on the mountainside. We're down in the valley. Aircraft are still burning in the landing zone. Not a pretty sight, but it's everything battle actually is. And you know, as a young man, I think most young men wonder how they would react under fire.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know how I would do. I thought, okay, I'll be a brave guy. It won't bother me a bit. Did it scare you a little bit? Yeah, but I found out that I would not duck under fire. I would do what I was trained to do, and just get through it one day at a time. And I'm often asked, well, were you scared? Really, as a rule, no. In the mission, I'd come back at the end of a day and think, I could have gotten killed out there today, but I didn't. Good Lord watched over me on many occasions over there.
Sir, I just want to interject something. That is why training is so important.
Oh.
You become a machine when you're trained properly and you take it seriously. That's the only thing you can cling on to, other than the wings of God protecting you, you know. But without training, you're going to falter, and you got so many people who are depending on you.
Well, and then that's true, Matt. We are trained, and military pilots, I think, are the best trained pilots in the world. And I'm a little biased. I'd say Army military pilots are the best pilots in the world. My Air Force and Navy buddies might disagree with me. In fact, I had an uncle. He unfortunately just passed away about 8 months ago. He was a naval aviator, flying A-6s over North Vietnam, getting shot at. His wingman got shot down. He shared with me at one time and what went on there. But I still like to think the Army pilots are the ones that's right in there looking eyeball to eyeball, doing our job. In fact, I have to just, in a sense of humor, one mission I was flying, and this is after I'd started flying gunships, or the UH-1B Huey gunships. We were on a mission and had some, we were supporting, at this time we were supporting primarily Vietnamese soldiers, because at the beginning of 1965 there were very few American soldiers over there. The Vietnamization of the war really didn't start taking place until about mid-65, when the 1st Cavalry Division came over, and the 1st Infantry Division, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and a whole influx of American servicemen, both ground pounders and aviators. But at any rate, we were on a mission, and we got a radio call to pull off the target, because it was F-100s from the Air Force going to drop some bombs on the target. And so we said, okay, we'll orbit out away from the area. So we watched the F-100s come in, and they got close to the target, but they were up much higher than we were, doing what we call pickling their load, or dropping their load. And as they broke off, I called them and said, if you got a minute, stick around. We'll show you how to hit the target. Because we were down at treetop levels when they were up at 2,000 feet. And like I said, we saw the enemy eyeball to eyeball often. And so with a little sense of humor, an inter-service rivalry, that kind of thing went on occasionally, and
Sir,
we kept it as that, as humor.
I've been in Hueys, and there ain't much to them. I mean, bullets can go through those pretty quick. I mean, you're scooting. How fast you going, and you're riding a piece of aluminum, I think.
Well, it's more than a piece of aluminum. It's a lot of plexiglass too.
Oh, gee, I feel better now.
No, in all seriousness, we did have armor plating around our seat. We had some armor plating around the critical parts of the engine and some of the control systems. But you can take a lot of hits and keep flying, or you can take one hit and be on the ground.
See, with a plane, with a hit, you got wings. If it doesn't go dramatically, straight down, at least maybe you can coast in. Helicopter, auto rotate maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, if you lose an engine in a helicopter, we do have auto rotation procedures. In fact, when I was back in flight school and throughout our whole military career, we spend more time on emergency procedures than we do just normal flying. Landing and takeoffs and hovering, that's just standard operating procedure. You don't have to think about that. But you think about what happens if you lose a tail rotor, what happens if you get an out of balance condition, an engine failure. And we do auto rotations on a regular basis.
Can you explain, sir, an auto rotation real quick what that is?
Well, if you think as a kid you had one of these little paper windmills that you blow into to spin the mill, a helicopter works very similar. We have a system where if your engine is knocked out or quits on you, the transmission between the engine and the rotor system will disengage and make it a freewheeling system. So the air coming up through the rotor system keeps it spinning if you do the right thing. And that is keeping your rotor RPM at the right range. That means changing the pitch of your blade so you have the least amount of resistance coming through that system, and allows you to literally fly it to the ground. You come in at a fairly steep angle, you flare the aircraft, and then pull pitch. And when you pull pitch, you take a bigger bite of air with that blade, changes the pitch of the blade, and that gives you an initial cushion. Well, the inertia of that blade slows down real quick once that additional power requirement is placed on it, and you're going to start falling down. So you have to be 10 to 15 feet maximum to pull that initial pitch pull, and then cushion it down, and you walk away from it if everything goes right.
You practice that.
You do. Well, actually, the military keeps jumping back from power recovery training auto rotations, which means you roll your power up and you don't turn your engine off. You just roll the power requirement off.
Okay.
And then when you get down to 100, 200, 400 feet, they keep changing this over the years. But then you roll your power back on, but you still go through all the deceleration, initial pitch, but you're never without power.
No, okay.
When I went through flight school, we rolled the power off and kept it off all the way to ground. And
that's when I was a kid growing up. I used to walk to school in the snow, going uphill both ways.
Well, as an instructor pilot, I've had to teach it both ways, and my preference is to take it all the way to ground without the power and make you do it right. And if you bend some skids, you bend skids. But when it comes to actually having to do it, you're not going to have that choice. You're not going to have power, so you've got to know the right procedure. Well, the military is also concerned with safety and cost.
Of course.
Aircraft are getting more and more and more expensive.
Sir, I don't want to cut you off, but I am on hard brakes and things, so I want to make sure we get this in. I remember a time you were telling me about a story about focusing in on an attack run. And the reason I'm telling you this or asking you this is because it's tunnel vision, and it happens in any episode of defense or aggression, whatever, you get tunnel vision. I would like you to explain that story because it's so fascinating to me.
I often wondered how these fighter pilots and the jets could fly into their target, what they call target fixation, and they just flew straight into their target. They didn't pull out or didn't pull out soon enough, and this was the problem. They all try to pull out because they realize at a point that they're going to hit the ground if they don't change the angle of attack, and so an aircraft will go into a flat fall. If you got so much momentum carrying you forward, or at the angle you are attacking, it takes time to pull out of that momentum that's carrying you forward and then get lift to get back up. Well, I found out how it can happen. I was in a Cobra, and it was redlined at that time at 210 knots or miles an hour. And I was a very high angle of attack, starting at about 1,500 feet. And I was coming in well in excess of 210. And at a point, my front seater, who's the co-pilot and gunner, I was firing rockets. And he said, "Ed, pull out, pull out." I mean, he repeated it 2 or 3 times, and I realized what's happening. It's time for me to start changing my angle of attack. Well, I started pulling out, but I continued to fly forward. And I got within touching distance of the nipple palm or low palm and brush that was on the ground. The only thing that saved me was I pulled out almost soon enough, but at least soon enough that when I got that close to the ground, the rotor wash from the aircraft, the rotor system, actually gave me a cushion from the ground, and I was able to pull out, and my skids actually touched the nipple palm, which was only about 20 foot high off the ground.
So explain though. I understand the procedure of what happened. What's going through your brain? Is it just like, I'm going to get this thing?
I've got to get that target. I've got to get the target.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, when it comes to helicopter flying or carrying a handgun, don't get tunnel vision. Stay open to more threats and whatever, and be able to focus on multiple things at the same time. Sir, we're almost out of time here. Tell us something else. Let's close up with something I think you hear the most successful operation or whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, my second tour, I went back with an air cav squadron that we had formed at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And one of our missions in December 30th, actually started on December 30th of 1968, we were searching for Nick Rowe, who had been a POW in the hands of the Vietnamese for 5 years. We got intelligence as to where he was being transported to, and I actually flew the command mission on the 30th looking for him, and we couldn't find him. The second day, on the 31st, Major Thompson was our troop commander. We went out on the same mission again, and we spotted him. I was flying Cobras, gunships at that time, and we spotted some Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, and NVA and the Viet Cong moving across an area down in the Delta, which is a very southern area of Vietnam, and they were moving through an open rice paddy. And so we figured at that time they were simply the enemy. And we lined up and started rolling in on it, and I'm about to pull the trigger. And Nick Rowe, who was one of those guys in black pajamas, kicked his hat off, and he's red-headed. The Viet Cong were not red-headed and didn't have red beards. And we were low enough, and our scout spotted him. He said, pull off, cease fire. And so we pulled off, and then Nick was smart enough he popped the magazine out of his guard's weapon, who was just, the guard was walking in front of him. They'd had him so long, and they were casual about covering him. He pressed the magazine into the mud and separated himself from the guards. So we shot the guards, and then our commander came in with his Huey and picked up not only Nick Rowe, but a South Vietnamese lieutenant who had also been a prisoner for a long time. And I figure that was probably the most rewarding and successful mission I flew in the 2 years I flew over there.
I bet you he would agree with you, too.
He would agree. You know, unfortunate part about it, he was assassinated about 10 years later as an attaché in the Philippines.
Ah, jeez. What a way. It's just like Patton, goes through all the war and gets killed in an auto accident. Sir, I can't tell you how enjoyable it was to have you on the air. Maybe we can get you back again. But everybody, this is retired Major Ed Thomas and a friend. And is there any, if you want, you can say how they can look at your antiques or whatever.
Well, no, just enjoyed being here. God bless all of you.
Okay, thanks everybody. We're going to take a quick break.